I didn't tell him what I actually do for a living. Not the full picture anyway. When he asked, I just said I worked in construction. He nodded, like that explained everything. Like it closed a door he didn't want to walk through anyway. I watched his face and I let it go. I'd gotten good at letting things go. My brother's engagement party was scheduled for the second Saturday in March at a restaurant in downtown Columbus that I'd actually helped renovate 2 years before. I remembered the job. We'd stripped the floors back to original hardwood, rebuilt the bar from salvaged walnut, rerouted the entire electrical through the kitchen. The owner had hugged me when we finished. Said it was the best work he'd ever seen on a historic building. I didn't mention any of that when my mother called. She said, I need to talk to you about the party. I was sitting in my truck outside a job site, eating a sandwich, covered in drywall dust. I said, okay. Your brother has a lot of colleagues coming, important people. His firm is very involved in the guest list. She paused. His fiancé's father is a senior partner at Caldwell & Moore. I knew the name. Anyone in commercial construction in Ohio knew Caldwell & Moore. They were developers, high-end mixed-use projects, office towers, the kind of work that made the front page of the Columbus Dispatch. That sounds nice, I said. Honey. Another pause. Longer. He asked me to ask you not to come. I stopped chewing. He's worried. And I want you to know I'm just relaying this. I'm not saying I agree. He's worried that if people ask what you do, it'll be awkward. For him. These are all lawyers and executives and he doesn't want the conversation to go somewhere uncomfortable. I sat there for a moment. The radio was on low. Some country song I didn't recognize. He doesn't want his sister at his engagement party, I said, because I'm a contractor. A general contractor, she said, like the distinction mattered. And he knows you're good at what you do. It's fine, I said. Honey. Tell him I said congratulations. I hung up. I finished my sandwich. I went back to work. Here's the thing about growing up in our house. My brother was always the one with the plan. He was going to law school. He was going to make partner somewhere prestigious before 40. He wore the right clothes, said the right things, knew how to work a room. My parents went to every one of his mock trial competitions. My dad framed his acceptance letter to Ohio State. I dropped out of community college after one semester and enrolled in a vocational program instead. Carpentry first, then general contracting coursework. My mother cried, not from happiness. My father said he hoped I knew what I was doing, in a tone that meant he was pretty sure I didn't. I spent my 20s working for other people, learning everything. Demo, framing, finish work, project management, client communication, reading blueprints, pulling permits, dealing with inspectors. I was on job sites at 6 in the morning for years. I worked for a restoration company that did historic buildings, churches, courthouses, old commercial spaces, and I fell in love with it. The problem solving. The way every old building had a personality. The way clients looked when they got back something they thought was lost. I started my own company when I was 28. Just me and 2 guys I trusted. By 31, I had 8 employees and a project manager and more work than I could take on. I didn't have a law degree. I had calluses and a portfolio and a business that was genuinely mine. My brother made partner at 33. My parents threw him a dinner. Nice restaurant, the whole family. I was invited to that one. I sat at the table and listened to everyone talk about his trajectory, his future, the incredible doors that were opening for him. At some point, someone asked what I was up to, and I said, running my company, and my father said, she does construction, and the conversation moved on. I drove home and I didn't let myself feel it until I was inside with the door closed. The engagement party happened without me. I found out how it went from my mother, who called the following Monday in the particular way she calls when she wants to give me information but doesn't want to be accountable for it. She said it was lovely. Said his fiancé looked beautiful. Said the fiancé's father gave a wonderful toast. His name is Warren Aldrich, she said. He's been in real estate development for 30 years. That's great, I said. Very well respected. They're working on a big project in the short north, commercial mixed use. They broke ground last fall. I knew the project. I'd actually bid on part of it. Interior renovation work on 2 of the anchor retail spaces. Hadn't gotten it, but I knew the name. Everyone in my world knew it. The Aldrich Group had been developing in Central Ohio for decades. Sounds like my brother is going to have a very good father-in-law, I said. My mother said, yes, I think so. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular, and then I had a site meeting to get to. 3 weeks later, my phone rang while I was reviewing plans for a restaurant build-out in German Village. Unknown number, Columbus area code. Is this Mara Calloway? A man's voice. Professional, not cold, but deliberate. It is. This is Warren Aldrich. I got your name from Phil Devers at Hartwell Builders. He said you did the Fenwick restoration on this street. I sat up a little straighter. I did. 2 years ago. I've been in that building 3 times in the last year. The bar alone. That walnut. I've been trying to figure out who did that since the first time I walked in. That was us. We sourced the wood from a salvage yard in Chillicothe. Took about 3 weeks to get it right. He was quiet for a moment. That's craftsmanship, he said. That's not something you can fake. He wanted to talk about a project. One of the retail spaces in his short north development had a troubled history. 2 contractors had already walked off the job. The timeline was in trouble. And the space was a 1920s building with enough structural complications that most people had underestimated it badly. He'd started asking around for someone who specialized in exactly this kind of problem. My name kept coming up. We met 2 days later at his office in the Arena District. He was in his mid-60s, trim, had the kind of quiet confidence that comes from actually having done things rather than just talking about them. He walked me through the space himself. The original tile work. The compromised load-bearing wall that the second contractor had ignored. The plaster ceiling that needed to come down carefully, not just demolished. He wanted it done right. He said that 4 times in different ways. We talked for 2 hours. I told him what I'd need, what timeline was realistic, what it would cost. I didn't soften any of it. I'd learned early that the clients who appreciated honesty at the beginning were the ones you wanted. The ones who wanted you to tell them what they wanted to hear were the ones who made your life difficult later. He hired me before I left the building. My daughter is getting married in June, he said as we walked back to the lobby. I hope we're not still in the middle of your build then. Depends on when you want the space finished, I said. He laughed. Fair enough. I'll take a deadline that works for both of us. I drove back to my office and sat at my desk for a few minutes before I called my project manager. I hadn't asked his daughter's name. I hadn't connected anything. Columbus felt big enough in the moment. It didn't occur to me. We started work in April. The job was exactly what I'd expected. Complicated. Requiring decisions every single day. The kind of project where you earn your reputation or you lose it. My crew was on site by 7 every morning. I was there most days by 6:30. I brought in a historic preservation specialist for the plaster ceiling. We discovered original mosaic tile under 3 layers of vinyl flooring and spent 2 weeks carefully exposing and cleaning it instead of the demo we'd planned. Warren came by every Tuesday. He walked the site, asked good questions, never once second-guessed a decision. On our 3rd Tuesday walkthrough, he said, I want you to know I've worked with a lot of contractors in 30 years. I don't say this often, but I trust your judgment. I said thank you, and I meant it. His daughter came by once in late April. I was deep in a conversation with my electrician when she walked in with Warren, and I glanced up and looked away and then looked back. I knew her. Not well. We'd met once at a mutual friend's birthday gathering, maybe 2 years earlier. We'd talked for maybe 20 minutes. She was warm, a little reserved, had a dry sense of humor I'd liked. I hadn't seen her since. I didn't know her last name. I certainly hadn't known who her father was. She saw me at the same moment. Her eyebrows went up just slightly. You know each other? Warren asked. We've met, she said. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something careful. Small world. Very small, I said. She and Warren talked for a while, and then she left. She didn't say anything else to me directly. I went back to work. That night I did some thinking. I thought about what this meant. I thought about whether I needed to say anything to anyone. I decided I didn't. I was doing my job. I was hired because I was good at it. Whatever happened at a party I wasn't invited to was not my concern. My mother called in May to tell me the wedding date, June 21st. Garden ceremony at a venue in Bexley, reception at a hotel downtown. "You're on the guest list," she said with a careful brightness that told me she'd had something to do with making that happen. His fiancée insisted. "That was kind of her," I said. There was a pause. "Mara, he knows he was wrong about the party." "He hasn't said that to me." "He will. He's just, you know how he is." I did know how he was. I'd known him for 30 years. Knowing how someone is doesn't mean you have to keep accepting it. "I'll be at the wedding," I said. "That's what matters." June came. We finished the Shore North project on the 14th, a week ahead of schedule. Warren did a final walkthrough on a Thursday afternoon and stood in the middle of the finished space for a long time without saying anything. The original tile floor caught the afternoon light. The ceiling plaster was clean and intact. The new elements, the fixtures, the millwork, the bar that anchored the east wall, worked with the building instead of against it. He turned to me and said, "This is exactly what I hoped for. Better, actually." We shook hands. He handed me a final check and said he hoped we'd work together again. I told him I'd like that. "I'll see you at the wedding," he said. I smiled and didn't say anything else. The wedding was beautiful. June 21st was clear and warm, the kind of Ohio summer day that feels like a reward for surviving the winter. The ceremony was in the garden of a venue in Bexley. White chairs, natural florals, the smell of honeysuckle. I sat in the third row on the bride's side because my mother had arranged the seating, and I didn't ask why. My brother looked nervous and happy. He cleaned up well, he always had. I watched him watch her walk down the aisle and I thought, okay, good. Despite everything, I wanted him to be happy. I'd wanted that for a long time. What I didn't want was to keep being the version of myself his embarrassment required. The reception was at a hotel in the Short North, not Warren's building. That tenant wasn't in yet, but close by. It was a beautiful space, a restored 1920s ballroom. And I noticed the detail work on the coffered ceiling and the original terrazzo floors, and thought about the people who'd put them in, and the people who'd taken care of them, and whether anyone else in the room was thinking about that. Probably not. That was fine. I was at a table with some cousins I liked, and a college friend of the bride I'd never met. The food was good. The toasts were sincere. Warren gave one that made people laugh and also made the bride cry, which is the standard for a good father of the bride toast. My brother's best man told a long story about law school that went on a little too long. My father wiped his eyes. My mother looked happier than she'd looked in years. I had 2 glasses of wine and danced once with my cousin Robbie, who is 62 years old and dances like he's trying to put out a small fire, and I was glad. It was during the cocktail hour before dinner that it happened. I was standing near the windows with a glass of sparkling water when Warren found me. He had 2 men with him, both in their 50s, the kind of men who carry business in their posture. He introduced them as colleagues, developers who'd been to the Short North space earlier that week for a preview. "This is Mara Calloway," Warren said. "She's the general contractor who did the build-out." One of the men, taller, silver-haired, handshake like he meant it, said, "I walked through that space on Wednesday, that tile floor. The ceiling. Who did your preservation work?" "I brought in a specialist for the plaster," I said, "but my crew did the tile exposure and cleaning ourselves." "You found it under vinyl?" 3 layers. We weren't sure what we had until we got the first section up. He looked at his colleague, then back at me. "We have a project in German Village. Late 1800s commercial building. We've been looking for the right contractor for 6 months. Can I get your card?" I gave him one. His colleague asked 2 follow-up questions, real questions, specific about timeline and structural assessment, and I answered both directly. Warren watched the whole exchange with a quiet expression that I could feel without quite looking at. My brother found me 20 minutes later. He'd been standing close enough to hear part of it. I didn't know how much. He came up beside me while Warren and the others had moved on, and for a moment he just stood there. "I didn't know you knew Warren Aldrich," he said finally. "I didn't until March," I said. "He hired me for a project." My brother was quiet. "You did work for his company?" "I did. It finished last week." He looked at his drink. He was a smart man. He was fast enough to understand exactly what the geometry of the situation was, that his father-in-law had hired his sister, the one he'd had excluded from a party because her job was embarrassing, and that this had apparently gone quite well, and that two of Warren's colleagues had just asked that same sister for her business card at his own wedding reception. "Mara," he said. I waited. "I'm sorry," he said, "about the party. I've wanted to say that since I've known it was wrong since before it happened, honestly. I just kept telling myself it was practical, and I knew it wasn't, and I'm sorry." He said it like he meant it. That was the thing about my brother. When he finally got there, he got there all the way. I looked at him for a moment. My little brother in his good suit on his wedding day, trying to be more than his worst instinct. I knew that feeling. I'd been working toward better versions of myself my whole life. It was harder for some people to start than others. "I know," I said. It's not that I'm not proud of you. I think I've been ashamed of myself, and it came out the wrong direction." "That's very self-aware," I said, "for you." He almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. "We're okay," I said, "or we're working on it. Same thing." He nodded. He touched my arm once, awkward in the way of people who don't know how to be gentle. And then his new wife appeared and took his hand and pulled him back toward the dance floor, and I watched them go. Warren found me again just before I left. He was walking guests out near the entrance, doing the unhurried work of a man who is comfortable in a room, who makes people feel remembered. He shook my hand. "That was good work," he said. "The project. And tonight?" I wasn't sure if he'd heard anything. I wasn't sure it mattered. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said. He looked at me the way people do sometimes when they've figured out more than they've said. "I had a feeling from the beginning you were exactly right for it." I drove home on surface streets because I wasn't in a hurry. The city was lit up, late June, warm enough for the windows down. I passed through the short north and slowed down a little when I went by the building. You couldn't see the space from the street, just the facade. But I knew what was behind it. What my crew had made right. I built a lot of things over the years. Fixed things that were broken. Brought back things people had stopped believing could be saved. I'd learned to do it without needing anyone to watch. Sometimes, though, I let myself notice when the work speaks up on its own. That's enough. I think about the moment my mother said he doesn't want you there, and how I finished my sandwich anyway. That's not indifference. That's something you build over years. The ability to feel the full weight of something and still go back to work. I didn't have a word for it then. I just knew that falling apart in a truck outside a job site wasn't going to change anything, so I didn't. What I've come to understand is that the way things turned out wasn't luck. It wasn't the universe evening some cosmic score. It was simpler and more honest than that. I had spent years doing the work the right way, and that created a reputation, and that reputation traveled into rooms I wasn't in. Warren Aldrich didn't find me by accident. He found me because the walnut bar I'd built in a restaurant he walked into kept telling the story for me. The work was still speaking 2 years after I'd finished it. That's what craft does when you do it with integrity. It outlasts the moment and becomes something that moves through the world on its own. My brother made a choice based on what he thought success looked like. He had a picture in his head, the right clothes, the right job title, the right people at the table. And I didn't fit it. I don't hold that against him the way I once did. He was working from a framework that a lot of people hand their kids without meaning any harm. Go to college. Get a desk. That's respect. Anything else is something you apologize for. He absorbed it the same way I had to spend years consciously unlearning it. What he didn't account for was that I'd spent a decade building something real. Not just buildings. Judgment. The ability to walk into a compromised structure and see what it actually needs instead of what's easiest. The patience to do the tile work right even when demo would have been faster. That kind of intelligence doesn't show up on the business card and it doesn't come up in small talk at an engagement party, but it shows up in the finished space, and the right people can see it. I think that's what I want to remember from all of this, not the vindication. Though I'd be lying if I said the moment with Warren's colleagues and the business cards didn't feel like something. But the longer truth, the years I spent doing good work, when no one important was watching, built the foundation for every room I've walked into since. The grit wasn't glamorous. 6:30 in the morning on a frozen job site is not a story that gets told at rehearsal dinners. But it compounded. Everything I forced myself to do well, even when it was hard and unglamorous and unwitnessed, added up into something that eventually spoke for itself. My brother apologized at his own wedding. Awkward and real and a little overdue, but real. I told him we were okay. I meant it. People grow when they're ready and not a day before. And I know what it costs to get honest with yourself about where you've been wrong. I'm not interested in holding the debt. I'm interested in what comes next. What comes next for me is the German Village Project, an 1800s commercial building. New clients who found me because of work I did for a man who found me because of work I did 2 years before that. The thread runs back a long way. I just had to keep pulling it.